Meyer from Riverside, and one of my jobs at Riverside is to be the reading specialist, but another passion that I have is to share about the brain, and each year we do Brain Camp, and so this year is a little different if you haven't noticed already. So instead of coming to your classroom and doing it, I'm going to do it remotely. Actually, I'm in my office at home doing it, and I'm going to share with you all the things I want to share with you about your brain and how it can make learning easier, more efficient, and more fun. So let's get started with Brain Camp.
'Cause you don't even know I can make your hands clap. Said I can make your hands clap.
All right, so here we are at Brain Camp, day number 1, and I want to start off with telling you congratulations. Congratulations on making the decision to learn something new. And some of you are like, Mrs. Meyer, I really don't have a choice of being here. My teacher brought me here. My teacher said I had to do this. But you always have the choice of whether or not you want to learn. So congratulations to those of you that are like, it is a new year and I am excited to learn new things, but I'm especially excited to learn about the brain. So congratulations and welcome to Brain Camp 2019. We're understanding your brain can rock your learning. What? Joe Blow. Is it, why do you keep having your hand up like that? Kids, why do you look so funny on your faces? Tell me, Joe Blow, what is it? Oh, it's not 2019. It's actually 2020. Well, you made my first point for me. And my first point is your brain is made to notice things. And right away when I said 2019, your brain said, wait a minute, something was wrong there. And you were a noticer of that. You're right. Welcome to Brain Camp 2020. So the first thing I want to do on day 1 is set some targets for us. Research says that if you set targets and you know exactly what you want to learn in a lesson, you are much more likely to learn it. So today I have 2 targets. The first one is to learn and identify the major parts of the brain. So I'm going to be teaching you all about the brain today. It is the parts of the brain. There's going to be some big vocabulary words today, but today's lesson is to learn all about the parts of the brain. And the second target from today is to think that the brain is amazing. Now, I just think the brain is incredible. It's responsible for everything we do. So I don't think it's going to take much for you to hit that target of thinking that the brain is amazing. So let's begin with that first target of learning and identifying the major parts of the brain. All right, so there are 4 lobes to the brain. 4 major parts which are called lobes. L-O-B-E-S, lobes. So the 4 lobes are this. There's the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that's right up front. Touch your forehead. It's right up front in your forehead there. It's responsible for your emotion and your personality. And the frontal lobe is where you have kind of your self-control takes place in there. And it's not really developed until you are about 20 years old. So sometimes when you do things and you get frustrated and you're like, why did I do that? I knew better than to do it. Part of the reason is that frontal lobe isn't quite developed yet. And so you sometimes don't have the same self-control or impulse control that you wish you did. It's growing. The second lobe here is the parietal lobe. And it is responsible for touch, but it's also like where your math is, calculation is here. And when you kind of bring things all together, it's at the parietal lobe. Then the third one here is the occipital lobe. And everything on the occipital lobe, which is located at the back of your head, everything in that lobe is responsible for sight. So you might be thinking, but you don't see in the back of your head. I don't mean that you see out of the back of your head. What I mean is when you look at things, everything that has to do with vision and seeing things gets processed in this lobe. And then the last one we have here is the temporal lobe. This is where a lot of your learning is done. A lot of the memory is done here, and also hearing is done here. Then we have some different, couple parts. They're not the major lobes, but the cerebellum. If I feel under my skull, do that now, scholars. Feel under your skull. There's like a little soft part there. Right up in there is where the cerebellum is. And that's responsible for your movement and your coordination. That comes out of the cerebellum. And then right straight down from that soft part going into your spine is your brain stem. And your brain stem is responsible for the things that you do that you don't really think about, like breathing. If you're looking at something for a while, you might blink without thinking about it. The things that you don't think through in these major lobes, those things happen in the brainstem. All right, now I told you that one of the goals was that you would know the parts. And when I look at this is a lot of new vocabulary. So I'm going to help you figure out how to learn those parts. So I'm going to give you what's called a mnemonic device. I like the way this word is spelled with an MN. Mnemonic device. And it just means it's a brain memory trick. I'm going to give you a brain memory trick to remember those. So when I look at the lobes, sometimes I like to use for my brain memory trick, I like to use the first letter. So I have a F, P, O, T. And that's the way that it moves around. It goes from the front, the parietal is on the top, the occipital is in the back, and the temporal, kind of by your temples, are on both sides of those. So one thing I know about learning is that when you have new vocabulary words, like I think frontal is going to be pretty easy for you to remember because you already know what the front of something is. So like in your brain, it's like you have something to stick to it. So frontal probably won't be a hard one to remember, but parietal might be because it's a brand new word. Occipital might be because it's a brand new word. Temporal might be a little bit easier because you see the word temper, or you might know temples and it might remember. So I'm going to use this mnemonic device, and I use this little guy to help me out with that. But FPOT. So think of a frying pot. A frying pot. Don't think frying pan because then you won't have the right letters. Think frying pot. And think it rhymes with hot. And it's hot information to know how all the parts of your brain. So the F is for frontal. The P is for parietal. Okay, how are you going to remember that word? Think of a pear, the piece of fruit. And it is rioting or protesting with anger. It's rioting because it's mad at all the apples. And it's a very tall pear. Parietal. All right, occipital. I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to remember that. Like octagon. Sip, a tall glass of water. Kind of like occipital. I don't know. I'm going to have to work on that one. I got frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. All right, the sides here, these softer sides on the side of your head here, kind of touch on the side of your head, and picture like when you have a temper, smoke comes flying out your ears, by the sides of your head, by your temples, when you have a temper tantrum. So that might help you remember temporal. All right, so we're going to use F for frying pot. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. So I want you to push pause right now on this and just practice that in your head, because by practicing it, you're going to be able to make some connections. Okay, so every time that we are adding on to our vocabulary, you know, at Riverside, we're vocabulary strong. That means we love to use new words and build our vocabulary. So I'm going to put these words on our vocabulary, in our vocabulary bank. Frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, and I put the little icon here for frying pot to help you remember. Cerebellum, the cerebellum is for balance. I see B-L, balance, balance and coordination, and brainstem. And think of breathing and brainstem. The fact that you know how to breathe without thinking comes from your brainstem. Okay, now let's start learning about what happens in those different lobes, what happens inside of that brain. First of all, your brain has these little strings almost that is constantly trying to make connections. Those strings are called, they start as little cells and then they reach out. And every time you make a connection on things, you can't see me, but my fingers are coming together because I think of these cells that are reaching out towards each other. And every time I make a connection and I learn something, I make this almost like this pathway, like this roadway that travels, and it makes it easier for me to remember things. For example, let's say I'm learning my math facts and I'm doing 5 times 3 is 15. And I practice it. I'm like 5 times 3, 10. No, that's wrong. 5 times 3 is 8. No, that's 5 plus 3. 5 times 3, and then I get 15. I make this connection in my neurons. These neurons connect each other just like a roadway. And the more I know something, the faster it goes. It becomes like a superhighway. Instead of having to take all the country roads to 5 times 3 and have to figure it out with my strategies, I just memorize it and I'm lickety-split, I have it. That is our neurons. There are about 100 billion of these neuron cells in your head. That's right. I said 100 billion of them. That is a lot of neurons, always looking to making connections. That's why before when I said parietal, a lot of you are like, I'm never going to remember that word. I've never even heard, because you had no connections inside of your brain to remember it. But then I said, think of a pear. And you're like, I know what a pear is. So now you have a connection. And think that it gets mad and riots against the apples. And it's a very tall pear. Parietal. So I gave you a little trick to help make that connection when it was something new. So now I've added on to my vocabulary words for the brain for today. I have frontal lobe in the front. Now I'm going clockwise. Right on the top I have the parietal. In the back I have the occipital, responsible for seeing. On the sides I have the temporal lobe, where we have our memory and our speech and our hearing comes from that temporal lobe. Then I talked about the cerebellum, balance, balance, and brainstem for breathing. And now I just added on neurons. All the little billions of cells in your brain just waiting to make connections. Your brain is amazing. When you think of all you do in a day, all the thoughts you have in a day, and all of that is taking place inside of your amazing brain. And your brain is always working. Even when you don't think it is, it's paying attention to things and it's always working. It's always working even when you're not. When you are sleeping, it's like your brain goes to its second job and it starts to think about all the things that happen during the day, and the nighttime when you're resting is where those connections kind of come together so that the things that happen and they're going to get stored in your memory are going to be, when we said that your memory's in that temporal lobe, the things that are going to happen that become memories are really going to be kind of solidified or made solid in the middle of the night. So let's look at some brain fun facts. It weighs about 3 pounds. So if you went to the store and got 3 of those pounds of butter, they come in like 4 sticks in a package, and you picked up 3 of them, that's about how much your brain weighs. It's about 60% fat and one of the fattiest organs that you have. So a lot of times we don't think of our brain as being fatty, but your brain is pretty fatty. The blood vessels that make up your brain, so all the blood that is pumping through your brain, if we were to take those vessels and stretch them all out, they'd stretch about 62,000 miles long, so about 4 times around the earth. Your brain actually produces energy. In fact, it makes enough energy in the form of electricity that if we connected it to a light bulb, it would power a light bulb. And it's filled with mostly fat, we said, and water. Those are the 2 main components of your brain. Just some fun facts for there. Your brain also has protection to it. Of course, when you're out riding or doing something dangerous outside, you want to wear your helmet, but your brain has some natural protection. Right here I put saran wrap, that plastic wrap. So here's your brain. And the first line of protection is your skull. So if you knock on your head, that's the hard part. That's its first line of protection. Now, underneath of that, on your brain, there's about 3 layers of this like skin. It's like a clear see-through saran wrap or plastic wrap that wraps around your brain. And then in underneath those 3 layers is water, so that the brain has kind of a cushion to it. So even though you don't want to hit your head, if you did accidentally hit your head, your brain is set up to try and protect itself. Now, a hard hit wouldn't do that, and that's why when you're riding your bike, you always wear your helmet, but it is set up to kind of protect itself. So let's jump back to those neurons we were talking about. So here's our brain, inside our brain, and all those billions of neurons. I want to jump back to that. When your brain is doing that super highway, or this highway, making these connections, all these roads, there is such a thing as a superhighway in neurons. And the superhighway is this. When you learn something inside, outside, upside down, you just know it forwards and backwards, you make a special kind of connection. So now take your 2 fingers and bring those 2 pointer fingers together. Go. You make a special connection on that neuron, and that special connection is when the neuron comes together. Right here's my neuron, and this white fatty tissue gets wrapped around it. It's our best and strongest kind of connection. For example, Joe Blow. Can you please spell your name for me? Yes. Did everybody see how quickly he spelled it? He said Joeeblow. He did not even have to think about it. He just knew it like that. Inside, outside, upside down. He has, for spelling his name, myelin. It means it's solid. It's like now I'm taking my fingers, I'm putting them together and I'm overlapping them. And if I took duct tape and wrapped it around there so hard and super glue and you're like, I can't pull it apart. That's myelin. Myelin is our best kind of connection. All right, so now we've added to our vocabulary words. We have our frontal lobe right up front at your forehead. We have our parietal lobe right on top. Moving to the back, we have occipital and we have our temporal lobe. Our memory trick for this is frying, for the F, P-O-T. Oops, a frying pot. So parietal, occipital, and temporal. Then we learned about the cerebellum, balance, and the brainstem as part of it, and brain, and we think breathing. And then we learned about neurons, and now you can't really see that there. I should have made, oh, there, myelin. Myelin is that special connection. So talking about that special connection, the kinds of things that you want to build myelin on are things like your math facts. You want to know those things inside, outside, upside down. If you are a second grader, you probably won't get your multiplication, but your facts are going to be your adding and subtracting facts. You want to know them lickety-split. If you're a third grader, this is your goal this year, to learn these. Fourth and fifth graders, most of you probably have a lot of these down, but you probably have a couple tricky ones that you have not built myelin on yet. Names. A lot of you have myelin on names. You might know the names of the people in your class. Well, maybe not yet, not all of them. The names of people in your family. You don't even have to think about that anymore. That's myelin, when it's something you know inside, outside, upside down. For me, this is kind of fun for me. I love learning about different countries and where they're located. So for me, knowing those different countries, that's myelin for me. Always being able to know where they're located. Not every country though. But like the states in the United States, that I have myelin on, except those ones on the East Coast. Those can get a little tricky for me. But myelin is the type of learning that you want to know or you want to do when you want something to be solid and you want it to be efficient so you don't want to have to think about it. I'm going to be coming back to myelin and talking about that a little bit more, but for now I want you to know it's that fatty tissue that wraps around right here. And it makes your learning solid. It's the best kind of connection. All right, now we have our different lobes here, and we've learned about them, but now I want to unpack one of them specifically, and I want to talk about this temporal lobe. So inside the temporal lobe, so let me just back up. Right here, the ones that's kind of on your temple on there, it's going to wrap underneath this frontal lobe and parietal lobe, but it would be on both sides of your head, but picture it goes all the way back like that. And then on the other side of your head of the brain, there would be this red part there. Now, it's not really red. It's not really any of these colors. I'll show you in just a minute. But these are just so we can see the different regions or lobes of the brain. But I want to talk more about inside the temporal lobe because for me, this is super interesting. I'll spend some more time during Brain Camp talking about these specifically. But for today, as we add on to our vocabulary, because remember our learning target was we wanted to learn the major parts of the brain, we're going to be talking about inside the temporal lobe here. So here's your frontal up here, here's your parietal, and then here's your temporal, okay? Oh, no, this is occipital. Here's your parietal up there. Okay, so one major part in there, right here, this part right here is called the hippocampus. I like that because I picture, a hippopotamus, and it kind of sounds like hippopotamus, but it's the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is responsible for memory and learning. So think of a hippo, and maybe he is at a special Camp Us, and he's at Camp Us, he's learning all kinds of things, and he's studying at the camp. It's a hippo at a Camp Us. Also, you could, but you probably don't have as many connections and things in your brain to stick this to. A campus is another place for a school, and where learning happens at a school, they can call it a campus. So up at Fondy High, some people might refer to it as the campus. But for you, that might be a new vocabulary word. So when you're trying to learn new vocabulary words, you have to stick it to something in your brain that you already know. So picture a hippo. He's at a camp called Camp Us. And at Camp Us, they do all kinds of learning and on memory. And they remember things. That's what the hippocampus does. It's your learning, but it's where all your memories are stored. So things that you learned, but also memories from when you were a little kid. When you're thinking about, oh yeah, I remember when I was 5 years old, and then you tell the story of something that happened when you were 5 years old, that comes from the portion in your brain in your temporal lobe that's called the hippocampus. Everybody say hippocampus. Hippocampus, hippocampus, hippocampus. Nice job. All right. The other part right inside of here, that's about the size of a Jolly Rancher, is called the amygdala. Y makes the short I sound, dala. I can't think of how to remember that right off of the bat. If you're a Riverside kid, you probably are familiar with this. And I am going to spend some time on the amygdala because I think it's so important to learning. But the amygdala is your emotions and how you feel about something. If you're very excited about something, that takes place in the amygdala. If you're very nervous about something, that takes place in the amygdala. If you're very fearful of something, that takes place in the amygdala. You might have heard me talk about the guard dog, and when the guard dog comes out, that's when I'm talking about the amygdala. You might have heard me talk about in the past, your wish is my command. That also takes place in the amygdala. I could spend 3 days of brain camp talking about the amygdala. It just is so fascinating to me. And I will at least spend one portion of a day talking about that. But one of the things I want you to remember is that amygdala that is inside your hippocampus, if that amygdala comes and is frightened or stressed, what happens is it shuts down the hippocampus. So the hippocampus can't operate unless the amygdala is regulated. It means unless you keep it at kind of a regular calm place, if you don't do that, the hippocampus cannot learn in those times. So we're going to spend some more time with that because those are really important things. All right, we added to our vocabulary. We have the 4 lobes of the brain. The frying pot. F, frontal. Touch it, right up front. P, parietal, right up on top. Occipital, in the back, has to do with sight. Sip, sight? I don't know. I got to think of a way to remember that one. If you think of it, make sure you let me know. Temporal, on the side, underneath the frontal, parietal, and occipital is the temporal lobes. Think temper, and it's a hot pot. So it's flying out, steam is flying out of your ears when you have a temporal lobe. Then the cerebellum is right underneath that little soft spot above your neck there. And that is cerebellum for balance. Then you have brainstem for breathing. Neurons, they're the 100 billion cells within the brain. Myelin is the connection of that cell that has the white fatty tissue wrapped around it. And it's when learning is inside, outside, upside down. Inside the temporal lobe is that amygdala. That's where your guard dog is located. And it's about the size of a Jolly Rancher. And then where memory and learning happens is inside that hippocampus. Okay, so now I'm going to show you, this is kind of interesting where they looked at a real brain. I don't know if you caught on before I said I'm going to show you the picture of a real brain. So it was kind of fun. They gave us some more information on there, but it was kind of fun to hear some of the language that we have been talking about there. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about today is during brain camp, I want to try to learn something new so we can start to see how our brain makes connections. Now, if you've been in brain camp with me before, you have done the boom, snap, clap. I think we called it pat, snap, clap, but they call it boom, snap, clap. You've done it, but this one allows us to add a little bit more onto it. So we're going to watch it today, and then we're going to start to break it down throughout our time together at brain camp.
This is a game called Boom, Snap, Clap. We'll do it first and then we'll show you how it's done. boom, snap, clap, boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, boom, snatch. Boom, snap, clap, boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, boom, snatch. Boom, snap, clap, boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, boom, snatch. Boom, snap, clap, boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, boom, snatch. Boom, snap, clap, boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, boom, snatch. So the easiest thing to do when you first learn.
Alright, so I'm just going to stop it there. Obviously, given that we are in COVID, we're not going to be able to do it with a partner, but we are going to be able to do it individually. So the first thing I want you to do, just in case you have some time in your rooms to be able to do it, is just break it down to its parts. And it goes boom, snap, clap. And the boom is a pat on there. So it's going to be boom, snap, clap, boom, boom, snap, clap. And I did this snap bigger because it's like it's an extra beat. And then it repeats. If you look at verse 1 and verse 2, they're the same. This is supposed to say yeah. I just put it too far down on my screen here. So it repeats right here with this extra beat of snap. And then they say shh. But I always say yeah and just kind of do jazz hands to it. Now, if you already know it and some of you are like, I remember that from the last time when we did that at Brain Camp, that's really good because I think it means you've built myelin in doing it. But you did see some other ones that they're going to do, which are doing it with your feet and doing it double with your hands. Now remember, during our masking time and during the COVID time, we're not going to be able to do it with a partner. But eventually life will get back to normal and we'll be able to do it with a partner, but you can definitely practice this on your own. So let's see, how did we do in day 1? Did you learn and identify the major parts of the brain? And did you, number 2, think that the brain is amazing? When I review that number 1, did you remember the different parts? The frontal, the parietal, the occipital, the temporal. Don't be too hard on yourself if you're like, I didn't remember those, because a lot of them are brand new vocabulary. New vocabulary doesn't usually come in one lesson. It comes with repeats because maybe you started to make some connections, but you didn't make strong connections and you certainly didn't wrap the fatty tissue around it to get that myelin. Remember that cerebellum is the balance, and brainstem and breathing go together. The brainstem is the parts of your body that you don't even think about, like your breathing. Neurons, there's billions of them, and myelin is the inside, outside, upside down learning that has the fatty tissue that's wrapped around it. Your amygdala is where your emotions and your guard dog sits, and your hippocampus is where your memory and your learning takes place. Okay, scholars, I hope you learned a lot today, and I'm excited for you to go to sleep because that's where all your memories will be stored in your hippocampus, and hopefully tomorrow you'll wake up and think, I remember a little bit about what I learned yesterday in Brain Camp. See you next time.